Welcome to the Great Cities Institute. Very excited to have Professor Moises Gonzales from the Community and Regional Planning Program at the University of New Mexico, who has brought students from their senior, or not senior, master's capstone project. So this is very exciting. You guys have traveled from Albuquerque to be with us. And we really are very much looking forward to hearing about Route 66 and the journey between Santa Monica and Chicago. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Professor. Thanks again.
So I'd like to thank Teresa for this opportunity. When Teresa was chair, I was hired as assistant professor. So it's been great to continue the collaboration with the Great Cities Institute on past things that we've done in the past. It's great to be here. We're also honored for our capstone students in the Community Regional Planning Program to be able to present their research. I try to have them compact it because there's so much information. I'm personally connected to this project because I'm from a community that was impacted by Route 66. And then eventually when Interstate I-40 was built next to it, I literally, when they blasted the granite from Route 66, I actually repurposed the boulders as part of my landscaping. So, watershed impacts, wildlife impacts. The story is pretty much mixed with both celebration and also trauma. So the whole purpose of this project is preparing communities in New Mexico how to celebrate or how to look at the future with the relationship of this historic road. So with that, I'll turn it over to students.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nathaniel Worster. I'm a student at the University of New Mexico, and we're going to go through our presentation today, the Mother Road. The centennial mark of Route 66 is upcoming in this next year, 2026. So a lot of the work in this studio was to prepare for that. And I will invite all the students to introduce themselves as we start off this presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Buchanan. I'm part of the studio students.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Perez, and I will be graduating this spring.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jared Weaver, and I'm here to give a quick overview of Route 66's history.
Lexi Hopa, Dushiname, Chantel Bustillos, Vishwash, Kumahu. I am Chantel Bustillos, and I am a second year in the MCRP program.
Hi, everyone. I'm Navida Johnson. My mother is Navajo Jeanette from Navajo Nation, Arizona, and my father is a Polish, Romanian, Syrian Jew from and I'm very glad to be here. I'll be going over landmarks.
Hey, I'm Maggie Ramirez, and I'm in my final semester of the master's program, and I'll be talking about the impacts of statistics on Indigenous communities.
Thank you, guys. So to start us off, I want to explain the mission of our studio. So I invite you guys to read through this slide. But our studio explores the past, present, and future of Route 66 in preparation for the centennial this next year. As Moises said, there is a lot of Route 66 that is both celebratory. However, there are a lot of events that were detrimental to communities as well. So kind of honoring that and understanding that nuanced legacy. So through research, community engagement, lots of community meetings, a survey process that we developed, and some analysis that is ongoing, we aim to create a recommendation document for several communities in New Mexico. Our document does have some overarching recommendations for Route 66 communities as a whole, but it is primarily New Mexico centric. So we hope to create a vision plan for the centennial celebrations next year and kind of to inform communities on this process going forward. So to just briefly introduce our 4 focus communities. So these are the communities that we spent the most amount of time on within our studio course. It's where we went and held community meetings, talked to constituents and other people in those communities. We worked with the communities, the municipalities there. So these are communities, and I'll go over kind of why these were selected because they each presented a different like story regarding Route 66. So Los Lunas, it's a rural community. It is south of Albuquerque. And we chose this because in New Mexico, Route 66 had two alignments, two very different alignments, one prior to 1937 and post 1937. So there were several communities that were on the initial alignment, were not on the second alignment. So that kind of had an effect on their development. So Los Lunas presented a rural perspective, and its development was highly linked to Route 66. So prior to the route, there wasn't much of a community at all. Now it's a pretty thriving small town. We chose the west central neighborhood of Albuquerque. It's an urban corridor, so it offers that perspective. There's notable Route 66 businesses. It's a place that where if you go to today, there's a lot of like neon signs, kind of the things that you associate with Route 66, a lot of like surviving diners, auto dealerships, stuff like that. And then Carnival, so the Conway land grant is a land grant. It's a Genesero community, and we'll kind of explain what that is later in this presentation. And Carnival is very rural and mountainous, so there was a lot of physical transformation to the landscape. So that was kind of why that was selected as a case study. And then the Pueblo of Isleta, it's a Pueblo community, so a federally recognized tribe. It was on the pre-1937 alignment. So each of our case studies were kind of to represent some different stories and policies that emerged during Route 66 and throughout the entire history of the route. This is everything that we're going to go over today. And I invite Jared to come on up to kick us off.
All right, hello everyone. I'm Jared Weaver, and I'm just going to give a quick background of Route 66's history. So the formation of Route 66, Route 66 was officially established on November 11th, 1926, and the route spans a total of 2,448 miles, directly connecting the main cities of Chicago, Illinois, which is where we are today, and then to Santa Monica, California. Its main design intent was to link developing rural areas to large urban spaces, improving our national mobility throughout the United States. And it was nicknamed the Main Street of America due to its role in small town economies. It was also the first ever US highway to be fully paved by 1938. So after its initial development, we enter the Great Depression and Dust Bowl stage of America. Route 66 became a main migration route for thousands fleeing the Dust Bowl within the 1930s. These families were known as Okies and traveled west to California seeking work away from the Dust Bowl. Route 66 became the nation's main lifeline for businesses, gas stations, and motels along the way. And it inspired John Steinbeck's novel, The Grapes of Wrath, calling it the Mother Road. The highway also helped distribute New Deal projects and improved our national infrastructure. After the Dust Bowl section of America, this kind of was the first development of our American car culture that we see today and a boost in commerce within the United States. After World War II, car ownership skyrocketed in American families, and Route 66 became a vacation route instead of a migration route. Hotels, diners, and gas stations boomed along Route 66, catering to road tripping families. The road symbolized freedom, adventure, and the overall American dream during this time period. And it inspired pop culture, including the song Get Your Kicks on Route 66. The highway became a popular trucking route, and due to this trucking route, it boosted our nation's commerce and trade. So due to this commerce boost, we see a population growth and change in major US cities and then small cities along Route 66. Route 66 facilitated mass migration, especially from the Dust Bowl states to California, in search of jobs and better living conditions. The highway spurred population growth in many rural towns by increasing business opportunities along the route. And then the post-war travel boom led to urban expansion along Route 66 as more people settled near major stops for work and tourism. But ultimately, the bypassing of these small towns along Route 66 by the development of the modern highway system led to a population decline in many communities once dependent upon Route 66's traffic. But currently, there are historic preservation efforts going on today to help preserve some of Route 66's small towns and bring back the life that Route 66 had. So this diagram here discusses some of that population growth and change that we can see within Route 66. The two main red boxes highlighted are Los Angeles, California, and Chicago, Illinois. These are the two major population changes that we see within the United States. As you can see, population in Chicago actually decreased from 1930 to current timeline because of so many people moving from Chicago westward along Route 66 to get to Los Angeles, which is where they ultimately ended up. In Los Angeles, you can see that the population doubled, almost tripled in population size from 1930 to 2020. And then as you can see, there's other notable cities along Route 66 that had massive population booms. In New Mexico, for example, Santa Fe's population had a huge increase, as well as Albuquerque. And then this next diagram shows that population data more numerically. So you can see Los Angeles had a huge increase in population while Chicago's dropped. And then you can see major cities like Oklahoma City, Tulsa, and Albuquerque had a huge population boom due to Route 66's effects. So after this population boom, there was actually a decline of Route 66. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 led to the construction of the interstate highway system. New highways ultimately bypassed small towns and herded businesses that relied on Route 66. Route 66, because of this decline, was officially decommissioned in 1985 and is no longer an official U.S. highway. Many iconic motels, diners, and roadside attractions were completely abandoned, and some sections of Route 66 fell into complete disrepair. So its evolution over time from beginning to end. So after its development, ultimately the need for faster and safer highways led to the development of the interstate highway system, ultimately replacing most of Route 66 as we see it today. As car ownership grew, the demand for wider, more efficient roads led to highway expansions that bypassed small towns along Route 66. Businesses and populations moved towards major cities and interstates instead of small towns. And Route 66 was officially removed from the US highway system as interstates took over its ultimate purpose. But recognizing its cultural significance today, there's a lot of preservation efforts that are going on to restore parts of Route 66 and keep it alive. So these two diagrams here show the major changes we've seen within Route 66. The first diagram, in red, you can see Route 66's original route created in 1926, and then those sections in green are additions made and changes to make the route faster and more efficient for those wanting to move westward. And then the bottom section, which is a very sad diagram, everything in orange is all of Route 66 that was taken over by the interstate highway system, and then in red are the preserved sections of Route 66. So as you can see, there's not a lot of Route 66 left today. And the legacy that it leaves behind. So Route 66 is now a historic and scenic route, attracting tourism from all over the world. Many towns have restored vintage motels, diners, and landmarks for visitors, and it has been designated a National Scenic Byway, preserving its history forever. The highway system continues to symbolize freedom, nostalgia, and the open road, and Route 66 trips remain extremely popular today, keeping its legacy alive. So that was just a general overview of Route 66. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Patrick. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Patrick again. I'm going to take us through to see how the existence of the route has influenced land uses. And we are mostly going to do this by using GIS tools. And so I'll start by looking at how the National Park Service views this route in terms of land uses. It believes the route starts from the shores of Lake Michigan across the agricultural lands, the center of commerce here in Chicago, connecting through the rolling hills of Missouri Ozarks, through the mining towns of Kansas, through Oklahoma, to Texas, the popular New Mexico, to Arizona, and then ends in California. And so for our land uses categories, we have to review some records of the National Register for Historic Places, and the groups land uses along Route 66 around the 20th century into these ones. Those that belongs to hotel, motels, restaurants, dinners and bars, gas stations and likely uses, museums, statues, and some attractive places, some motorport campgrounds, and all dealership related to automobile, public lands, and recreational sites, as well as those uses that they did not really have classes or groups, that is miscellaneous. And so to further visualize these categories and the data that is available, we decided to put this into a chart to see how they are being constituted around a circle. And so we realized that at that time, gas stations, garages, and stores dominated, followed by uses that were related to motels, restaurants, and public lands also was very major, followed by museums and attractive places, and the other uses, which probably belong to miscellaneous, constituted about 40%. And so moving into recent times, we further looked into these categories, how 66 has indirectly or directly influenced land uses. And so we realized that some popular uses are developed areas usually found in cities. We have got some open spaces, mixed forests, grasslands, open water sources, and some cultivated croplands, colleges and universities. Military installations are highly influenced by the existence of these routes, national parks, preserved sites, as well as the forest preserved sites. And so from here, we're going to look at deeply with the use of GIS to spatially show how these land uses are being displayed or are aligned as far as Route 66 is concerned. And so these are the classes with these designated colors that we're going to run through the following maps. So we want to start from here in Chicago, where we believe others are saying the most popular, I think majority of people believe the route starts here, but in some other records, see that somebody can also say that it ends here. So we took it that it starts from this place. And so in Chicago, we realized that in Illinois, we realized that these are the notable uses that were highly influenced by the existence of the routes densely developed in areas, cities like Chicago, Joliet, Springfield. Military installations were highly influenced, and a for example was the National Guard encampment in Springfield, some cultivated and commercial croplands, as well as public lands. And connecting through the Missouri, we realized that yes, of course, the same thing in cities, we find some developed like mixed uses in city centers, and then popular reserved installation, reserved forest parks, as well as military installation also there. And then in between the cities are mostly grasslands and mixed forests. And this is a popular trend that comes across. And this is Kansas. In Kansas, the route only runs about 30 miles through the state. And so popularly, croplands are dominating with some mixed forests. And the popular Missouri River runs through 66 in Kansas. So we are moving ahead. So we connect to Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, the popular cities like Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and so on are dominated, are seen to be highly developed with mixed uses, mixed forests in between cities, croplands, grasslands, and open water sources. To Texas. Texas, we only have recognized mixed uses, not too high in Amarillo, and the rest are croplands being dominated by these colors, as well as grasslands. So in New Mexico, this is home. This is our home. So we decided to look into two angles. So the route was highly aligned in two directions in New Mexico. That is from 1926 to 1937, which we termed as parallel to 1937, running from the north to the east of Albuquerque, to the south of Albuquerque, and then another one from the east to the west of Albuquerque. So the first angle we looked at was the first alignment. And here, okay, the popular Albuquerque, we found mixed uses, highly dominating public lands and mixed forests, with a typical example of the Pecos National Historic Park, military installation, the Albuquerque, the Kirtland Air Force Base is highly influenced and aligned with 66. So from 1937 till now, this is the alignment in New Mexico now, and Albuquerque with the Air Force Base here and some other uses. And so the route ends in California, and this is California. So, oh, sorry, this is Arizona. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is Arizona. So Arizona popularly Flagstaff is the big cities around along the streets. And these are the trend of uses that we found in other states are still here. popularly being highly influenced by Petrified Forest National Park in Holbrook. And then the Painted Desert is also highly assessed by the roots today. So ending in California, yes, California and cities like Santa Monica and Los Angeles are highly devolved, still assessing the existence of the roots. And then popular sites that are long and highly also enhanced is the Mojave National Preserve at Texas. And then coming down, like Nathaniel said, there are communities that we are studying in New Mexico as our focus communities. KK is not part, but that is the biggest city. So we decided to descend our study from there. And this is the route passing through the center of the city of Albuquerque and highly devolved uses, mixed uses. And this route has been so important and taken as one of our major routes in the city. And so this is what's also approved by the city as land uses and would depict what the land cover database depicts, that the city is influenced and mixed uses along and other preserved sites. So one of the community we are studying is Los Lunas, and this is Los Lunas. Samely depicting what is happening at the state level. We can find some mixed uses around the community center, and then some poplars and grasses outwards. To Canal, like he made mention to, which is a very small community, this is what is happening there. And then ending in California, Chicago here, we decided to also look, as we are here, we look at what is happening here. And this is how the route used to exist, and this is what was happening. Highly dense mixed uses here. And so our takeaways are that the existence of the route as then and today has influenced mixed uses, especially in city centers. It has enhanced educational uses. Roadside business are highly affected. Agricultural uses, mining and ranching activities are also benefiting from this route. It has also influenced the rate of urbanization and migration in, through the country, various sectors of the country, like Gerard said, we used to be a route that people travel along, changing where they stay. And then preservation of historic sites is very important to this route. And then some tourist activities also influence, as well as transportation, which is the ultimate use of the route. I'll end my presentation here and then invite Nabila to continue taking us through landmarks. Thank you.
Thanks. This is different being here and here. Hi, everyone on Zoom. Thanks for joining us. And I hope you can see me and welcome. Thanks for welcoming us. My name is Nabila, and we will begin our journey with landmarks, film, TV, and tunes. So before we start, we know that Route 66 has created a cultural landscape. The Mother Road influences the arts, sculpture, music, and new tech in the 20th and 21st centuries. And again, just briefly, what is a landmark? It is an object such as a sign, sculpture, or natural feature that marks the boundary of land. It marks a locality or point of orientation, and it's designated for preservation. Why it's important to Route 66 is because they become visual markers to identify where roadside attractions and notable establishments and spaces are located. They do add a sense of charm for the trip itself, and it did help the Mother Road be a symbol of freedom. And if you just kind of pay attention here, as we go through the states, some years will be highlighted in a magenta, designating them as locations before 1937. Orange will be post 37 to 2000, and we will start in Illinois. So beginning in I've learned that it is its own independent city, but because of Chicago's size, Joliet is where we begin our journey, and we will head in a southwestern fashion through the state. And we have songs and film and TV that were popular because of Route 66 in Illinois. And those items are here, and each state will have their own designated letters showing where those locations are approximately located.
Your voice, I think you can hear us.
Oh, okay,
Better.
and let me know. Thank you for bringing that up. Can you hear me back there? Okay, great, thank you. So just real briefly, as I was exploring just a little bit more of Chicago, I can understand why the built environment is so impressive and such a huge foundation of the city, the metropolitan region. And here are some listed haunted landmarks that created the built environment here. And as you can see, everything's magenta, very, all these are treasures. And then we're gonna pass the state line into Missouri. These are the brief inventory of what we will find as we navigate through Missouri. And then that's where we see that Rosemary Clooney and Chuck Berry definitely have their creativity and their songs related to Route 66. Again, as mentioned, we headed to that southeastern corner of Kansas, that 13-mile stretch. And if this looks familiar to you and you have kids, it's because this part of Kansas did inspire the settings in movies such as Cars, which Disney Studios did create. And we also have, we pay honor to Will Rogers and to Chief Black Dog and his band of Osage Indians. Heading into Oklahoma, we definitely have a big presence of 66 honoring the landmarks and the legacy here. This is where Cyrus Avery conceived the idea. And then he joined his buddy from Missouri. And then you'll hear the story of the Phillips Petroleum brothers starting to, get onto this new adventure. But either way, Cyrus Avery was the person who conceived it, and he is from Oklahoma. And then even today, we have a lot of film and TV that are filmed along Route 66. And just heading into a not such a big stretch as the rest of the states, but still notable. We are heading into Texas. And here we have our famous landmarks here. Another landmark in Cars. I just need to catch a breath. Thank you. And then we also have some wonderful big hit films that have been filmed along Route 66 for sure. And my favorite, George Strait. So go to the honky tonk. And then we head into my home state of New Mexico, or I should say home for the last 37 years. I moved here from Arizona when I was 10. And so I was raised in New Mexico. And as mentioned, we have our original 26 to 37 stretch from as we exit Texas into New Mexico. We're going to pass Tucumcari heading west. Then we come up to a little town called Santa Rosa. And that earlier original stretch went straight north to a little place outside of Las Vegas, New Mexico, and continues through Pecos Pueblo Mission. And then we head up to Santa Fe, and that is its farthest northern point, heading back down through the other Pueblo nations that are just north of Bernalillo and Albuquerque. And then we head straight down to Los Lunas, which I actually did not really know was a part of this Route 66 pathway, the original, until we did this project. And then at that point, we go back up to where Laguna and today's I-40 do intersect, heading back west. But just real quick, our orange circles are going to show on the next slide our landmarks that are anything before 37. I don't care if it's 50,000 years old or 1908. They'll be orange and on the next screen, and then our blue landmarks on the next screen are just those that came right after in parallel with I-40. So here's our good old 26 to 37. Again, a lot of magenta. We forget the land of enchantment is just that. And then we have some of those blue circles here. And then we are going to head on out over to Arizona. And so again, what's great about Arizona is we start to get some songs that actually inspire landmark designs. And so if you are a fan of the Eagles, you are going to definitely enjoy the standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona. And then we also have, of course, our wonderful Meteor Crater City And that guy, he wins. He's the oldest. And so we move on out, and again, good old films and TVs, Forrest Gump, one of my favorites. And now we're in California. And so again, from east to the westernmost point, this is it. If you were wondering what your life would be, whether you're rich and famous or you're just barely getting by, you know, the land of milk and honey was something we wanted to learn more about. And we do that through this stretch. Our original ending was in Los Angeles between 26 and 37 at downtown, and then later after 37 ended in Santa Monica. And today, Santa Monica is the spiritual official end of Route 66 that was designated by the city and state in 2009. So with that, thank you for joining me on my journey. And remember the fun songs and film and TV from California as well. And now I will hand it off to Michelle, who will talk to us about racialized spaces. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Perez, and I'll be discussing racialized spaces along the Mother Road. I'm going to discuss how Route 66 is often a symbol of freedom. However, the route wasn't experienced the same by all. Let's start with the key term racialized space. These are environments that are shaped by racism through laws, policies, and planning decisions. Things like redlining, segregation, and exclusionary zoning aren't accidental. They were tools used to control space, access, and mobility. This timeline shows how policy shaped who can travel carefree on Route 66 and who couldn't. Route 66 was created in 1926, and while many Americans were excited for the open road, Black American travelers faced sundown towns, segregation, and denial of services along the route. With the paving of Route 66 came the promise of growth and mobility, but it also came with new tactics of exclusion. As the road opened access for some, redlining maps were made and drawn to deny it to others. In 1934, the Homeowners Loan Corporation created redlining maps that indiscriminately labeled Black American neighborhoods as hazardous, cutting them off from loans and investment. Just 2 years later, in 1936, the first Green Book was published. It was a guide that helped identify safe places to stop along the route where Black American travelers could eat, sleep, and refuel. As mentioned, the Green Book was more than a travel guide, it was a strategy of resistance. Victor Hugo Green and his team here, Alma D. Green, his wife, and co-editors, main mission was to protect Black American travelers from the dangers of a segregated country. It was a tool built for community by community, offering not just direction, but dignity. Here, we're going to review a few scans of the Green Book and the listings in the state of Illinois. There was always about 4 to 5 pages of listings in Illinois, which is awesome. In New Mexico, we see a different story. They're displayed on my poster boards. It's often 1 page or half a page. And if you're interested in exploring more scans, they're available through the New York Public Library. So here we have the 1949 version. Here we have 1953. And the last version, 1966. So in this map, I wanted to show the historical Route 66 in gray, and each blue triangle is a Green Book site. So each point represents more than a stop. It represents safety and care and community and a landscape of exclusion. Here we have GIS maps that show the Green Book sites in the state of Illinois. Coming right in, I have to mention St. Louis, Missouri, because this is such a hot spot for Green Book sites. And then we make our way to Springfield, Bloomington, and Joliet. So while the Green Book built safety, redlining built boundaries. The HOLC created to prevent foreclosures during the Great Depression. They made these color coded maps. And unfortunately, Black and Brown communities were almost always marked in red and labeled as hazardous, cutting them off from housing, investment, and mobility. Redlining happened in every major city along Route 66, from Chicago, Illinois to Los Angeles, California. These maps show how Black American communities were systemically cut off from opportunity. And the labeling, green for best, blue for still desirable, yellow for declining, and red for hazardous. And currently, the contemporary issues that we see in formerly red line neighborhoods include lower home ownership in people of color, underinvestment, and disparities in health and education. Here we have the lining map of Joliet, Illinois, Springfield, Missouri, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Amarillo, Texas. And finally, we're ending with Los Angeles, California. And here we have Santa Monica. So I want to share that, yes, we often remember Route 66 as a symbol of freedom, but for many, that journey came with fear and exclusion. So when we place the Green Book next to redlining practices, we see how racism shaped not just where people could live, but where they could go. And this isn't about rejecting the Route 66 celebrations next year. It's about expanding that history and that celebration. We have an opportunity to honor people like Victor Hugo Green and his team who built tools that gave Black Americans access to the open road. Because the road has never just been about where it goes, it's about who gets to go. My project is grounded in critical race theory and the belief that city planning must go beyond maps and zoning. Route 66 isn't just about pavement, it's about people. So thank you, everyone. And I will now hand it off to Maggie to talk about Indigenous lands.
Hi, I'm Maggie Ramirez. So Route 66 from here to Santa Monica is nearly 2,500 miles, and 1,372 of those miles pass through Indigenous territories. We focused a lot on New Mexico, our home state. So this is a map of the present day boundaries of Native nations in New Mexico. And the original alignment went along I-25. It passed through several pueblos, the ones listed here. And then in 1937, they rerouted, cut off the I-25 alignment. And now, am I in the wrong place? Okay, step back. Not on camera, it's better. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. So the later alignment in 1937 cut off the I-25 and all those sort of historical communities and just went basically straight west from Texas to get you through to Albuquerque a lot more quickly. And the alignment that's in place today just goes through 3 tribal communities: Acoma, Laguna, and the Navajo Nation. In addition to the present day boundaries of Indigenous territories, Route 66 passes through a number of historical Indigenous communities that were forced off their land and put into reservations and pueblos. And so these are a list of some of the historical territories that Route 66 passes through. In addition to tribal nations and pueblos, Route 66 passes through a number of Genisado communities. Genisado communities are people and communities that are of Indigenous descent, people who were taken captives in battles during the colonial period. And one of these communities is Carnuel, which we focused on. Moises, our professor, is from Carnuel. So we were able to go tour kind of the sites of Carnuel, where you could just see the boulders onto the road, as he mentioned, that were pushed through as the construction for Route 66 and later I-40 was happening. We presented to Carnuel as well, kind of our project, and we asked for their input in the form of a survey, because we're planners and we love surveys. Surveys are our love language, and we hope you take one so that we can take your thoughts and tabulate them and put them in a graph and use it to help inform our recommendations. And so I keep standing in the wrong spot. This is a map of the Carnwell land grant specifically, and on the other side are a number of different Unisato communities in the upper Rio Grande Valley, which is to say the Rio Grande is the river that runs through New Mexico, and there are a number of Unisato communities settled in land grants alongside the river. We focused on Carnwell, but there are others. There's Abiquiu, a number of them Truchas, Trampas, Ranchos de Taos. It's a really beautiful trip, even though the original Route 66 no longer goes through there. It's just like a wonderful road trip if you're looking for one. So Route 66 came along, in the 1920s, and then it was sort of realigned in the 1930s. But this area that Route 66 goes on had been used for transportation and trade for centuries. So there was the El Camino Real, which was a footpath from Mexico City to Santa Fe in the 1500s and beyond. Later, wagon wheels used the Santa Fe Trail from Independence, Missouri, all the way to Santa Fe. And then the railroad kind of followed the Santa Fe Trail. And so Route 66 basically built on those trade networks and transportation corridors. And what Route 66 did with the help of the car, the automobile, right, was basically accelerate and consolidate the locations of cross-cultural interactions between indigenous communities and travelers. So a lot of this happened at the trading posts, like they became kind of these locusts or nexus of intercultural or cross-cultural communications. And this is an image of, it's now called Kiwa Pueblo. In the picture, it's called Santo Domingo Pueblo. It's along I-25. It's one of the communities where there was a trading post. And so tourists were encouraged to stop and shop and buy native artisan jewelry and pottery and textiles. And in exchange, there could be like groceries from Anglo communities sold there. And then, so when Route 66 was realigned and taken off I-25 and into sort of the straight west alignment, it bypassed this, which had a big impact on the economies of these communities as well, right? Because there's now not a bunch of tourists passing through to buy things. So one way that Route 66 also impacted indigenous communities was through the basically mass production at various points of artisan native crafts. So this guy Maisel set up a shop in Albuquerque to increase the rate at which people could produce silver jewelry. And so people were bussed in from the reservations and the pueblos, like from Isleta, and they were put in a factory and then made native style crafts. And these crafts were basically re-exported to native nations and pueblos to be sold at trading posts. This is a Navajo Nation trading post along the Great Divide. So this has survived the realignment because it's sort of western. It's more west of where the realignment happened. So it's both on the original and the modern or present alignment. And another way that the Route 66 impacted indigenous communities was through the use of indigenous labor for road construction itself. So this is a picture of La Bajada Hill. If you've ever driven from Santa Fe to Albuquerque on I-25, there's this point at which it just like swoops down. And so it's like a big grade. Indigenous labor was used for the construction of the road, especially people from Cochi Pueblo. And then tourism was heavily promoted along Route 66, especially through New Mexico. And the New Mexico State Highway Department actually like endorsed sort of tours of indigenous lands as part of their official tourism and marketing campaigns. This was the official state highway roadmap of New Mexico in 1936. It has, sort of this traditionally dressed person and then like a very sleek automobile in the back. And a lot of it was promoted as kind of like, come see living archaeology in place, or like, come visit the past, or see this sort of frozen in time thing. So a lot of sort of really stereotypical depictions to promote tourism. And then here's a picture of Albert Einstein. He went on one of the tours. There were official tours from the Fred Harvey houses. Also here, this is what it looked like, kind of a brochure for that. You could go out and like join a tour for the day. So one thing that I found when I found this image was that, you know, he's wearing a plains headdress. So this is from a like a tribe in the Midwest, and he's in Arizona here wearing it. And so it wasn't always even like location appropriate. So today there's actually like an association, the Native American Association, that has produced their own travel guide for Route 66. And so a lot of the sort of narrative now is about kind of being able to tell the story from an Indigenous perspective by Indigenous folks. And so if you go to this American Indians in Route 66 is a travel guide that you can use, produced by an American Tourism Association to visit places and have an Indigenous take on them. So Route 66, like a lot of urban planning in the history of America, is sort of this tension, right, between improving the built environment, improving infrastructure, and preserving the environment and protecting the communities who may be affected by that infrastructure. And I think the goal is always to just make sure that infrastructure improvements benefit the communities who are being impacted by them alongside them, and not only the people who are traveling through or using it to commute, or who are, you know, going to Santa Monica to chase their dreams. All right.
Thank you, Maggie. Hi again. I'm Nathaniel, and I'm going to be discussing public lands, New Deal infrastructure projects, and the interstate system. So Route 66 and our national identity. Route 66, even no longer being an active highway, it's a like oddly patriotic symbol. It's a piece of physical infrastructure that we have elevated to be a symbol of American identity in so many ways. And I think there's a whole list of factors for that. But it's so ingrained in our national consciousness. And I think partially that can be attributed to the presence of so many public lands along the route, as well as WPA and CCC projects that we'll discuss. So public lands, before all of the other tourism infrastructure was built along the route, so all of kind of the novelty architecture, diners, motels, motor courts that you see, I mean, public lands, we had these existing along the route. We've pulled a few for these slides. I invite you to stick around after the presentation. There's a more complete list on the boards of everything kind of along the route. But this really encouraged tourism along Route 66 in the early days. It offered travelers unique experiences and outlets to experience some cultural heritage and beautiful natural sites. And then, so some major public lands along Route 66 include the Gateway Arch National Park in St. Louis, Missouri. And then Polodoro Canyon State Park is a massive canyon state park just south of Amarillo. It's notable because when we think of Route 66, we tend to think of it in an east-west movement. So this would have been the first place that travelers along the entire route would have been exposed to kind of the grandeur of Western landscapes. And then Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona and Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona were both huge drivers in tourism along the route. So these sites help sustain local economies and contributed to Route 66's lasting appeal. So now moving on to New Deal programs. So the Work Progress Administration and Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s and 40s helped build and improve roads, bridges, and other tourist attractions along Route 66. And these would eternally tie ideals of American resiliency to the road itself. So just a few key WPA and CCC projects are noted here. There's also a ton more on the boards if you'd like to see a more complete list. But what's so important about WPA and CCC projects is for most of these projects, it was primarily young men from urban centers moving to work. It was oftentimes their first time leaving the city that they were born and raised in. They were working in rural areas, building up infrastructure. So you have almost an entire generation of many Americans who now they think about Route 66 in terms of like American craftsmanship and their own handiwork. So it's really odd to see kind of how that was built up in Carnival when we went and toured it. There was so much kind of demolition of the mountainous area to build the roads, both Route 66 and I-40. There's a work progress administration fish hatchery, like the remnants of it in the mountains. It's these massive concrete tanks, and then a fish ladder down into like a mountain stream. But that work, it's hard to track down like where the workers were coming from in different records, but it wasn't workers from Cornwall, it was workers from somewhere else. So they would have been staying in Cornwall for a large period of time. So we have people, this is kind of where we start to see people become romantic about the ideas of Route 66 and the communities along it. So these projects modernized Route 66, its communities, boosted tourism, and provided jobs during the Great Depression. If you ever go to Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona, basically all the facilities there are CCC original constructed. And what's super interesting is because of this, we have all of this tourism infrastructure built up during the Great Depression. Then there's not much travel for leisure during World War II along Route 66. But then after World War II, when we see families growing larger, higher disposable income, more automobile ownership at a personal level, all of this infrastructure is ready to go. It's already been built prior during the Great Depression. So that's really why we see Route 66 skyrocket in popularity. It was just kind of waiting a perfect storm of events. So prominent public lands and New Deal improvement sites along Route 66. This is just to show kind of a spatial relationship. So there's a pretty even dispersal of these along the route, and it definitely, the concentrations get heavier as you move westward. So President Eisenhower's Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 led to the construction of the interstate system. So interstates replaced lots of segments of Route 66. The new highways were safer and faster, but they bypassed many small towns, leading to economic decline for many Route 66 communities. And also because the interstate system was a national project, it opened up new kind of popular routes westward that didn't go through the Southwest. So many travelers moving from east to west, they opted to go through Colorado, Utah, Nevada, into California, or the Dakotas, Montana, Idaho, into Oregon and Washington. So we really see a dispersal of tourism across the entire Western United States rather than being so Southwestern focused. So a road that lives on, despite being decommissioned in 1985, Route 66 remains a cultural icon, with preservation efforts keeping its legacy alive. There's been a tourism revival in recent years through national and state preservation programs, Route 66 museums and festivals, and nostalgia-driven road trips and media influence. I think it's also important to note that a lot of tourism revival that we're seeing is from international tourists. So kind of the ideas of Route 66 have spread globally. There's car clubs from Japan, Germany that come, they want to motorcycle or drive sections of Route 66. So these ideas are really spreading farther than we ever could have imagined. And then Route 66 continues to symbolize freedom, adventure, and resilience, preserving its status as the mother road. And now we'll move on to kind of an environmental analysis.
Thank you. Hi again, I'm Chantel. So we got to hear a lot of really valuable and historical information. It's been, I know it's been a lot to take in, and we know that Route 66 does hold a special place in US history. But there is another side to its legacy, and one that has significantly shaped our environment, particularly across the Southwest. So as the road was developed, it did bring with it major environmental consequences. First, abandoned infrastructure and pollution. Second, urban sprawl and highway expansion. And third, the effects on wildlife and ecosystems. And so these are three key areas of focus that I chose to pursue in my section of the project. So as over time, as traffic moved to bigger highways, many of the small towns that once thrived along Route 66 were left behind, and what remained were ghost towns and gas stations, decaying buildings. And so these remnants aren't just aesthetic concerns, they carry real environmental risks. Abandoned gas stations have often left underground tanks that leak, and that contaminates the soil and the groundwater. Old buildings may contain hazardous materials like asbestos, and without regulation, many of these spaces become dumping grounds for trash and industrial waste. And so at the same time, Route 66 also did play a role in fueling growth, and growth that was not often planned.
The highway encouraged the rapid spread of roads, neighborhoods, businesses, into previously undeveloped areas. And, this kind of expansion often led to the destruction of natural landscapes, replacing open space and natural habitats, with concrete and asphalt. And so we see this pattern especially clearly in places like Albuquerque, with the expansion of I-40 and its frontage roads, that did bring suburban sprawl right into the Rio Grande Valley. And this kind of growth, as we know, is really impactful to our ecosystems. And talking about wildlife at risk, so these changes haven't just affected land, they've also affected the animals that live on it. Highways like Route 66 have a major impact. They cut through migration corridors, making it a lot harder for animals to cross the highway safely. In New Mexico, for example, mule deer and elk often struggle to cross the highway. And we've seen hotspots for wildlife and vehicle collisions along roads like US 550 and I-25 as well. So these roads do also isolate species from one another, reducing genetic diversity, and making populations more animal populations more vulnerable to diseases and climate stress. And so yeah, so I kind of just want to highlight that this is really important for our local communities. Revitalizing Route 66 can mean more than just repainting signs and restoring diners. It can mean building a new legacy, one that values our heritage both environmentally as well. And just as a closing, we now have this opportunity to reimagine and renew Route 66 historic corridor, shaping a future where it supports both communities and the natural world for generations to come. And so I'm going to pass it back to Nathaniel, who's going to talk a little bit about our survey.
So this slideshow isn't kind of the final product of the studio. That will come in the form of a document and a vision plan that we're working on that will be finalized in the coming weeks, or at least our work on it, and be made publicly available. So this presentation was a bit of kind of a modified version of what we gave in our focus communities, just to have the attendees there kind of think about different aspects of Route 66. So we have a survey that we designed that was both used in our community meetings, and it was also sent out through electronic means, some pamphleting, some in-person kind of events that were a little bit more casual at other Route 66 events. But it was to just help inform our recommendations going forward to put into this report. We'd love it if you guys would scan this QR code and take the survey and do it kind of the best of your ability. Just kind of whatever thoughts you may have, whatever things you know about events that are happening, because part of this is kind of information and idea sharing between communities. So all of this kind of, it helps us build a more holistic report in the end. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. And we'd love to kind of field some questions. We can take some as a whole group, and we're also happy to stick around, talk about boards or any parts of the presentation.
But one thing is, Edward, in order for us to scan that code, I think we need to move that video down a little bit.
Oh, yeah, I got it. Oh, yeah.
And then Moises, before we go to the
Maybe move it to the left side. Yeah.
actual,
Shoot.
you want to introduce your teaching assistant?
Oh, yeah, Sean Fernandez is also a research assistant on the project. He's been collecting archival photographs, and actually building an archive along with the project. So he's very critical to it.
Kick off any comments or questions, and then we can open it up. Is there anything you want to add or elaborate on or say anything about the process?
Well, I mean, it's been a really cool process. Looking at old maps from before Route 66 was even in existence, trying to find those archive maps and understanding that Route 66, Maggie mentioned, that this has been a trail, especially coming from Albuquerque. It's been in use for eons. You know, this was probably established by ancient animals. And then humans usually jump on the trail. And then because you're talking about coming from the mountains, going to the Rio Grande River, just to get water. So, you know, but again, it's been a really cool process, and you know, this is a great time to see how we utilize this route, you know, and still are utilized. So.
Ten questions, floor is open. When you said like, specifically like what it's still, the route still like runs from Chicago to Santa Monica, but what parts are like, not, you know, like gone? You know, how much is gone? Like what percentage? How does that work?
So that map that Jared showed, I don't know kind of an accurate like percentage. If you'd love to jump in.
Approximately 85% of the route has been overtaken by the highway system, which is very unfortunate. There's very small percentage of the actual route still left that's usable. Yeah, sad.
But it's interesting because it's still a part of our fascination, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, are you all familiar that are here in Chicago? I guess there's a quarry not far from here. So one of the things I was enjoying watching YouTubers. And there's a lot of YouTube videos trekking Route 66 near the quarry. And you can see its own, you know, nature, you know, rules, right? It's like taking over Jurassic Park, life finds a way. You see trees in the middle of Route 66 coming up and weeds and everything. But if you get to YouTube, put Route 66 Chicago quarry near the quarry, you're gonna see a bunch of videos, and it's fascinating though. It's like a ghost channel. And then on each side is just this drop down to the mine. So I just had to share that if you were interested.
But going back to kind of what's existing and what's been kind of removed or overtaken by the interstate system, part of this studio is also kind of uncovering within individual communities if this is still something important to them in terms of their tourism, their economic development. Because in New Mexico, many of the communities do find it very integral. There's a lot of attempts to preserve Route 66 and kind of that Americana. But if you go to a place like Flagstaff, Arizona, they've kind of transitioned away from that, despite it being a notable Route 66 community. They're like, we're a college town in this very trendy mountain town, but Route 66, it's not so much in our like preservation efforts going forward. It's not so much in what's going to drive our tourism as a city and our economic development. So these conversations have been really revealing of what people think about it and what they kind of want Route 66 to look like in the future, or if they really, to be frank, don't care that much about it. So
Any questions?
yes.
Do you have any suggestions on how to preserve Route 66 in some of the areas, say, in our community in North Lawndale? There's 2.83 miles of Route 66 in that area. And so with us dealing with IDOT and CDOT and them wanting to redesign parts of what is part of Ogden Avenue, we're pushing back because we want to preserve the service drives that are on Ogden. And, you know, they want to come in and put bump outs on the roads and accommodate road diets. And we want to, my argument with them is not to create more traffic problems and more traffic accidents, but to fix it where everybody can use it and it still preserves the historical status
So
of what that looks like.
in like New Mexico, many segments of it have been various kind of historic preservation overlays have been used so that there can't be that much of a physical alteration to it. And a lot of our recommendations are focused on the centennial that's coming up next year, because I think if people, if you're able to showcase to the public and everyone, it may renew interest in Route 66. And if you can kind of really get descriptive about how Route 66 is essential to the character of a neighborhood, or the historic aspects of it are very unique to there, I think there becomes a lot more pushback to change in it and more support for preservation. of the physical infrastructure.
So I'd like to stay on this for a few minutes because for you all that come from Mexico, this area that she's talking about, North Mondale, it's a neighborhood just west of here, southwest of here. And as she said, one of the main corridors through North Mondale is Ogden Avenue, which is the Route 56. This is an area that very, very important, sort of vibrant African American community that was affected by the deindustrialization, the loss of manufacturing jobs. There's been a lot of movement. There was, beginning in the mid-70s and the 80s, a lot of movement of capital out of that neighborhood and leaving behind a lot of joblessness and anchor institutions leaving. And so now there's interest in reinvesting in it. A new job, we did an analysis with them, there's a new jobs that are being created are not being got by people from America. So it's really kind of an neighborhood in the process of being revitalized. It could also be a neighborhood that displaces. So there's a lot of really active groups in North Mondale that are trying to take an active role in maintaining their neighborhood. So if we could, I mean, other people always says others, if we can comment for a few minutes on what ways in which they can visualize using the power of the Route 66 concept to sort of enhance their concepts of their ownership of place and space. And what, what might be some zoning strategies, what might be some organizing, what might be some conceptual strategies that maybe they could begin to think about.
I like the idea of creating an overlay plan. Or even saying that, so what you do is, kind of just like, I really agree that, 66 in a lot of communities as a case study, it's the preservation, concept at the neighborhood level that ends up being a galvanizing kind of idea. So I think even just say, hey, we want to discuss with the DOT this preservation overlay, and then facilitating community meetings. There'd be a great project for your urban design program here. In terms of looking at documenting the historical significance, the cultural significance, the significance of the neighborhood, and elevate that conversation because it is that. It's related to your identity and the community consciousness. And so that's you look at a lot of these areas and segments of 66 that are preserved, it's because they're really important to people. They're really important to the fabric of the community. And at the end of the day, I think facilitating those conversations will strike the DOT to pay attention.
So what would be in that overlay? What kinds of things?
Not familiar with the road, but I think first of all, like this urban design strategies is, document create the archival document, create community meetings, have community come in with how it relates to their how it's important to them and their relationship to Route 66 in the neighborhood. And then of course, doing what you having recommendations and say, that's what's powerful about the planning process, right? It gets us all together to have conversations about what's important. Then we come up with the recommendations to say, hey, DOT, this is what we want. I think that would be a great project. And that's really kind of what we've been doing with our local communities, is that's why we have foresight communities.
We've been doing that for the past 3 years.
Okay.
We keep getting a lot of pushback because of what they want to bring to the community and we're pushing back for what we want. And we've gotten a lot of that. Before we didn't have community engagement. Now we do have it because we forced it. But we haven't met with them in almost a year now, so we don't know what they're planning.
Well, and I think it's the powerful thing of community engagement and in the field of planning and urban design is to not wait for them, but to say, here are our recommendations.
Yes, we've done that.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, now it's just creating a movement, right? That's the other part, is the movement piece, right?
It's sort of like history repeating itself, like Paul Williams. They mentioned that, that they were doing work back then with Route 66 with people, they were bringing people from inside to make the money and complete the work, and not from Cornwall weren't part of the process.
And if you'd love to talk about like displacement in Cornwall and people being able to buy land.
Well, yeah, I mean, like in my community, Route 66 came and then they built I-40 next to it. Literally, we have like these irrigation systems in New Mexico, they're called acequias, that really go way, they're really old indigenous and then when the Spanish came, they were adapted from the term sequia, which is the Arabic word for an irrigation ditch. Well, we had 5 acequias that in our farmland, and basically when they started building I-40, they condemned our water, all our cropland and flat down. And this was before after the construction of the interstate system, there was no EPA rules regarding, basically, I mean, that's the whole history of this infrastructure. And going back to like, even like like when Michelle was talking about the racialized aspect that, communities had to do the green book to safely passage, the country, so, I think it's our legacy in the United States that a lot of communities infrastructure impacted our communities and it continues. It's not something that goes away. It's something we're having to deal with in every community. I mean, we had to fight the DOT because they were going to eliminate one of our off ramps in Cornwall. And that took a lot. So at the end of the day, I think a lot of it's community organized, to be honest with you.
And then you have the, where we are, there are 2 aldermen that serve that area. So the other part of west of Pulaski on Ogden Avenue, there were some historical landmarks there. And now they're gone because that alderman didn't fight hard enough.
Oh, man, that's horrible.
To keep those buildings, and so it's going to probably be turned into a hub for somebody like Amazon, which will affect the infrastructure of the community because a lot of those homes were built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and now they're owned by seniors. So gosh, if they can, if the infrastructure starts to shake and houses start feeling they have the money right to fix it, to put it back. So those are some of the things we're up against.
Did you say you had already performed like an inventory of the existing historic structures or what you think is important to the community? Do you already did that?
We've had those meetings.
Now, what about taking it to the next level of actually designating them as an actual historic site or landmark through the state's preservation office? Have you guys done that?
I don't know. Yeah,
Because it's like, then it's like, I see this is here, it's legit, it's actually something we need to watch. So we're not just taking away something, it has it's a presence there, it's purpose, can't erase it.
I can find.
It would be another place to start because I'm learning that a lot of the homes or businesses in our part of the Route 66 pathway, they decided, well, you don't think this is important, we're gonna make them important.
Yeah.
And now we're submitting our packets to get recognized as a historic site or structure, whatever that was, a sign. And now we get to go to the next level. You got your lawyer, now we get to have representation. I hate that has to happen, but sometimes that may have to happen, but when you have the documentation and back it up, it's like game on.
I know there was one person who works for one of the historical preservation. He works for the Chicago Preservation. I don't know the full name, but anyway, he was working on trying to have some of those buildings as a landmark. But
And
other politics that then.
I will add, like, even it's dependent on your like state historic preservation office of what you can like nominate to. Because you were talking about trying to protect some aspects of the roadway or some service roadways. Because like in New Mexico, you can nominate even like a railroad bed, like a historical, if there's a pile of rocks that used to service a rail line, that can be protected as a historic structure. So trying to get as broad with that definition as possible and kind of going back to Navidad's point, you can really protect a lot.
And every state's different. So like, I think the state historic preservation or rules, in terms of, in New Mexico, once there's a designation And then, and then then it comes out through the NEPA process. So, I would argue that, I doubt if that portion of Route 66 still exists. I think it would violate NEPA processes of DOT if they were trying to disrupt it.
Yes, I know it may be an extra work and a little more time, but getting just even a little team or subcommittee. You focus on NEPA requirements, you focus on your state historic preservation office requirement. Do we need this? Oh my gosh, we not only need this, we exceed this. Now let's go to, plan B. And what does that look like? Through a deliverable. And we stand behind it. It's not kind of, I'm gonna get good energy and big, strong muscles to take me off. But this has to happen. Whether it's successful or not.
Yeah.
Money talks, we'll slide, they'll build deal, there's like, something like this.
We have seen that kind.
Throughout the history of the United States, and so,
Yeah, so
we gotta fight for but.
that's it, that's it.
This whole conversation of the proper transportation for. Yes, the Northern Nation Council. I used to tell that album years ago, it was written by the governor of Virginia. And they had an executive director, but I remember talks about economic development, Route 66 and all the stuff. But it might be a good place to start because they do work in tandem with the historic society. I would recommend, going there as well.
Awesome.
Any last questions? We deserve to have a conversation because we had to pack everything and I know we went over time on our end. So any last question?
In advance of like the centennial celebrations that I assume will be popping up across, the route next year, how many different groups do you guys sort of have to share your work with, knowing there's not gonna be one entity that is responsible for the celebration? You're gonna have a lot of state tourism boards and local tourism boards. And communities like you said earlier, might not want to celebrate the history. There's others that do, but they're only gonna think about it commercially. Let's you share your work on the environmental that should be indigenous work, or basically how long is your roadshow here in the.
So in terms of like who we are planning on sharing kind of the report with, we do want to make it publicly available. We have it accessible on the web somewhere, but in terms of targeted sharing, we're working with the land grant in Cornwall, their like board, so it'll be shared with them. Those are kind of the decision makers in that municipality. In Los Lunas, it's the village government as well as there's a local historical society. In West Central, it's the various neighborhood associations. And in Isleta, it's the Pueblo government. But I think that's also something that we've been kind of seeing in our survey responses coming back is there are people in communities and they're like, hey, this should be sent to this person or this should be sent to this board. So like it's been great feedback for us to kind of build that out because it lets us know like who might get a lot of use out of a report such as this. So that's been really helpful. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah. A lot of times maybe a celebration comes up and this important background work hasn't been done in advance. With the celebration, you guys have done the groundwork and they just for the documentation that can now be part of it.
Yeah.
Right?
And
really important.
that was a conversation that we had in class a few weeks ago, there's been some, because so much of this is trying to pick up the momentum of the centennial year next year and kind of carry that forward. But right now, like reaching out to some local communities and people, they're not interested yet, or they're not thinking about the centennial yet. So we're fully kind of understanding that this report may not be picked up by a lot of people or like read until next year, but we kind of want it like ready to go. So it's helpful to kind of have it done prior to that.
So I don't think even that it should be thought about with having a way to go in next year. But given it hasn't been during the process of 2024.
Yes.
So just something here, we could continue to be very willing to help put it out to put up there. But what I would recommend is there be a section at the end, and you guys really take some time to think about how, based on what you learn, what are recommendations for other communities along the
Yeah, that'd
route?
be cool.
Which I think gets to Kyle's question.
Mhm.
And it gets also to the question, for example, out North Bergen. You know, the idea is like, what is it that communities can be doing or might be able to do? Because if they think about the corridor and the way that you all presented, it, you know, the commercial corridor revitalization, the historic preservation piece, you know, the different components that you guys think would be relevant to the communities along the way, and actually introduce some strategic actions that communities could engage in to actually do more of this, as well as highlight some of the examples of where people are doing things.
Okay.
And then you make it relevant to an audience, beyond just the sort of the audience, even further than you already have. And then you get it out there as people are starting planning for next year. So it's not like, okay, hey, here's part of the celebration, but it's like, it's actually helping to shape what the preparation for that celebration looks like.
Mhm.
So that the result isn't just a celebration, but it's some concerted actions that people could employ to actually enhance the importance of the corridor and create some local community economic activity and place building community out of.
Mhm.
Can I just ask that, Teresa? Because that actually triggered experience real fast. I don't want my back excited real quick, sorry. But onto that point, what I learned was, and what I was disappointed about. So, and this might be in a similar experience here as it is back in the city of Albuquerque. I was so disappointed that our inventory at the city level preservation office had only a couple dozen landmarks in the record. But the neighborhood organizations that are throughout the city had everything. They were stronger and ready to back up whatever was in their, boundary. And that tells me that they went through this process and they were so assertive about it. It's like now it's like this own little, micro community with its own governance in that way. Before you decide to plan here, whatnot, we are the group of people you now have to address. And so I'm gonna go back for my recommendation and ask Nob Hill Neighborhood Association, University Heights Neighborhood Association, how did you start? What did it take for you to get that acknowledgement? Okay, now you have the acknowledgement, you exist. Now, how did you go about getting these sites and structures documented, recorded, and recognized officially? And then now what are you doing? Because some of the neighborhoods have now what Moises was saying, a historic overlay. And so that's law, right? In a sense, you've got to know what layers there are to either work with or around, but you don't go through it. You got to meet the people that made it there first. That's cool. And that, to me, that's kind of power. And so I'm glad you brought that up because I'm going to put that on my recommendation. That's make sure that you share it.
More comments, question.
Well, we really appreciate the invitation to raise it on this too, and really appreciate your time. Viewing our presentation, and very appreciative community.
Thank you so much.